This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Oil prices extended gains on Monday, with Brent headed for a record monthly rise, after Yemeni Houthis launched their first attacks on Israel over the weekend, widening the U.S.-Israel war with Iran in the Middle East. Brent crude futures jumped $3.94, or 3.5%, to $116.51 a barrel at 07:03 GMT after settling 4.2% higher on Friday. U.S. West Texas Intermediate was at $102.14 a barrel, up $1.86, or 1.87%, following a 5.5% gain in the previous session.
U.S. President Donald Trump signaled he was reversing course on blocking oil shipments to Cuba on Sunday, saying he had no problem with any country sending in crude as a Russian tanker neared a Cuban port with a badly needed shipment. A sanctioned Russian vessel, part of the country's shadow fleet, was just off the coast of eastern Cuba on Sunday, according to ship tracking data, and was expected to reach port on Monday, a lifeline for the country's economy that has nearly ground to a halt under a de facto oil blockade imposed by Washington. The U.S. cut off Venezuelan oil exports to Cuba after toppling Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on January 3, and Trump threatened to slap punishing tariffs on any other country that sent crude to Cuba.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said on Monday the government would halve the excise on fuel and diesel and remove the heavy road user charge for 3 months to help households cope with a surge in costs driven by the Iran war. Halving the tax would reduce the cost of fuel by 26.3 Australian cents per litre, Albanese said. The total cost to the government would be about $2.55 billion Australian dollars, $1.75 billion, Treasurer Jim Chalmers said at a joint press conference with the Prime Minister and Energy Minister Chris Bowen.
Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto said on Monday during an official visit to Japan that the Southeast Asian country will go ahead this year with its B50 palm oil-based biodiesel program. "We are going in a big way to biofuel," he said at a business forum ahead of his meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. In January, authorities scrapped a plan to launch B50, a blend of 50% palm oil-based biodiesel and 50% conventional diesel, this year due to technical and funding concerns, instead sticking with the B40 blend. Next, we have the top news in metal market. Gold rose more than 1% on Monday on bargain hunting, but was set for its largest monthly decline in nearly 2 decades as rising oil prices due to the escalating war in the Middle East all but eliminated U.S. interest rate cut bets for the year. Spot gold rose 0.8% to $4,529.58 per ounce as of 0913 GMT, after gaining more than 1% earlier. U.S. gold futures for April delivery gained 0.8% to $4,558.30. After prices touched multi-month lows last week, traders saw an opportunity to buy the dip, driving the gains in the precious metal seen today and on Friday, said active trades analyst Ricardo Evangelista.
Aluminium prices rose sharply on Monday as market participants braced for a deeper supply shock after Iranian strikes over the weekend hit 2 of the biggest producers of the metal in the Middle East. Benchmark 3-month aluminium on the London Metal Exchange was up 3.85% at $3,423 a metric ton, as of 0718 GMT. Earlier in the session, it hit its highest since March 19 at $3,492, close to a 4-year peak of $3,546.50. The most active aluminium contract on the Shanghai Futures Exchange closed 3.43% higher at 24,725 yuan, $3,578.82 a ton, after rising as much as 3.91% earlier in the day to 24,840 yuan, the highest since March 19.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Malaysian palm oil futures rose for a third straight session on Monday, lifted by stronger Chicago soyoil and crude oil prices, while robust export figures continued to underpin market sentiment. The benchmark palm oil contract for June delivery on the Bursa Malaysia Derivatives Exchange was up 36 ringgit, or 0.78%, at 4,667 ringgit, $1,160.95, a metric ton by the midday break. Crude palm oil tracked gains in the Chicago soybean oil and crude oil markets during Asian hours, said David Ng, a proprietary trader at Kuala Lumpur-based trading firm Iceberg XSDNBHD.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.